The waves roared like an angry beast as Caleb Fisher steered his weathered fishing boat through the churning waters. The storm had been relentless, but the skies now showed hesitant glimpses of light through the heavy grey clouds. His hands, calloused from years of labor, gripped the wheel tightly as he scanned the horizon for debris washed ashore by the tempest. Then, something caught his eye, a sleek white lancha drifting aimlessly in the distance. Its hull was scratched, and the once pristine deck was battered by the storm. Caleb furrowed his brow and maneuvered his boat closer. A shiver ran down his spine when he saw her. A woman lay sprawled on the deck, drenched and unmoving. Her pale skin contrasted sharply with the dark, wet strands of her hair plastered against her face. Caleb's instincts took over. He secured his boat to the lancha, climbed aboard, and knelt beside her. She was alive. Her shallow breaths were barely audible over the sound of the retreating storm. "Hey, can you hear me?" he called out, his voice rough but steady. She didn't respond. Carefully, Caleb lifted her, surprised by how light she felt. Her clothes, though soaked, hinted at wealth, a tailored blouse, delicate jewelry. Yet here she was, adrift and vulnerable, far from the polished world she seemed to belong to. The small wooden cabin smelled of salt and damp wood. Caleb laid the woman on the old couch, covering her with a blanket. His dog, Rusty, sniffed at her curiously before settling at Caleb's feet. As the woman stirred, Caleb fetched a cup of warm tea and crouched by her side. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing wide, confused eyes. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You're safe," Caleb reassured her. "Found you out there after the storm. Do you remember anything? Your name?" She blinked slowly, her brows knitting together. I don't know," she admitted, her voice tinged with panic. "I can't remember." Caleb leaned back, scratching his chin. "No ID, no nothing on that boat of yours. Looked like someone wiped it clean." The weight of her situation seemed to hit her all at once. Her hands trembled as she gripped the blanket tighter. Caleb felt a pang of sympathy but kept his voice steady. "All right. Until we figure out who you are, we'll call you Ellie," he said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "Ellie," she repeated, testing the name on her lips. Her expression softened, though her eyes still carried the shadow of fear. "Thank you." The sun dipped low in the sky as Caleb stepped outside to chop firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe grounding his thoughts. Inside, Ellie sat on the couch, gazing blankly out the small window. Rusty curled up by her feet, offering silent comfort. Later that evening, as Caleb prepared a simple meal of fish and bread, the door creaked open. Sophie Ramirez, Caleb's childhood friend and the unofficial guardian of the fishing community, stepped in without knocking. "Caleb," Sophie began, her sharp eyes immediately landing on Ellie. "Who's this?" "A storm survivor," Caleb replied, his tone curt. "Found her adrift. She's got no memory." Sophie crossed her arms, her gaze narrowing. "And you're just keeping her here? You don't even know who she is, Caleb." "What if she's trouble?" "She's not trouble, Sophie," Caleb said firmly, though the doubt in her voice echoed in his own mind. "She needs help." Sophie sighed, softening slightly but still wary. "All right, but don't let your guard down. Not everyone's what they seem." Ellie remained silent during the exchange, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the blanket. When Sophie left, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Caleb said simply, though he avoided meeting her gaze. "We'll figure this out." As the night deepened, the cabin fell quiet, save for the crackle of the fire. Ellie stared into the flames, her thoughts a jumble of confusion and fear. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye, wondering who she really was and how her world had collided with his. Caleb stepped outside, the sound of the waves a quiet reminder that the storm was over, but not the questions it had left behind. Inside, Ellie sat by the fire, a woman without a past and maybe without a future. Who is she? Why was she out there? I know you're wondering, just like Caleb, but here's the thing. Some answers come with time, and others, well, they change everything. Stay with me. This story is just beginning. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far our stories are reaching. The soft rustle of waves outside Caleb's cabin offered a sense of peace that neither he nor Ellie truly felt. The storm had passed, but its aftershocks lingered in their lives. Ellie sat at the edge of the old wooden porch, her bare feet brushing against the rough planks, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for answers hidden in the expanse of blue. Caleb stood a few feet away, silently repairing a fishing net, his hands deft, but his gaze occasionally darting toward her. Ellie's voice broke the silence. "I keep dreaming," she said softly, almost to herself. Caleb paused, his fingers tightening around the net. "Dreaming about what?" She hesitated, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "It's always the same. Lights. So many lights. People talking, but their voices are muffled. Then water. Cold, endless water." Caleb frowned, setting the net aside. He crouched next to her, his expression serious. "Do you see faces, places?" She shook her head, frustration flickering in her eyes. "It's like trying to hold on to smoke. Every time I think I have something, it slips away." That night, Ellie's restless murmurs filled the cabin as she thrashed in her makeshift bed on the couch. Caleb, sitting at the small wooden table and sorting through bills, glanced up each time she stirred. His usual calm demeanor was beginning to crack under the weight of unspoken worries. The fishing hauls had been poor since the chemical spill upstream, and the community was struggling. His dog Rusty let out a low whine, sensing his unease. Ellie jolted awake with a sharp gasp, her wide eyes scanning the room as if expecting danger. Caleb was at her side in an instant, crouching beside her. "You're safe," he said firmly, his voice grounding her. She pressed her trembling hands against her temples. "I saw something," she whispered. "A hand. Someone pushed me." Her words came in fragmented bursts. "And there was shouting, I think—" She stopped, looking at him with panic. "What if someone tried to hurt me?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "You're safe here, Ellie. Whoever they are, they won't find you." The next morning, Caleb brought Ellie along as he prepared his boat for another fishing trip. She watched quietly as he worked, the early sunlight casting long shadows over the dock. The rhythmic slap of the waves against the hull seemed to calm her, though her mind remained a maze of unanswered questions. "Why do you do it?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Fishing, I mean." Caleb glanced at her, then back at the tangled rope in his hands. "It's not just a job, it's a way of life here. The ocean gives us everything: food, work, a sense of purpose." Her gaze drifted to the distant water. "And now—" He paused, his fingers stilling on the knot. "Now it's harder." The spill changed everything. The fish are fewer, the bills pile higher, and no one at the top seems to care. His voice carried a bitter edge that surprised even himself. Ellie opened her mouth to respond, but stopped, unsure of what to say. She felt a pang of guilt, irrational but persistent, as if her presence somehow added to his burdens. Later that day, Sophie arrived unannounced, as usual. She carried a basket of bread and a look of mild disapproval. "How's the storm survivor?" she asked, her tone more pointed than concerned. "Recovering," Caleb replied curtly, his focus on gutting the morning's small catch. Sophie glanced at Ellie, who sat nearby, flipping through an old book she'd found in the cabin. "You don't think it's strange, Caleb? A woman washes up with no memory and no explanation. It doesn't add up." Caleb shot her a warning look. "She's not here to cause trouble." "Maybe not," Sophie conceded, lowering her voice. "But trouble has a way of finding people like her." Ellie pretended not to hear, but her fingers tightened on the book's edges. Later, when Sophie left, she approached Caleb hesitantly. "She doesn't trust me," Ellie said. Caleb sighed, leaning against the counter. "Sophie's just protective. She means well." Ellie looked down, her voice barely audible. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm trouble." Caleb straightened, his gaze steady. "If you were, I think I'd know by now." "Give yourself some time, Ellie. The answers will come." That night, as Caleb sat outside repairing his nets under the dim light of a lantern, Ellie joined him. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt and seaweed. She watched his hands move methodically, weaving and knotting the rope with practiced precision. "Do you ever feel like the ocean knows things we don't?" she asked suddenly. Caleb chuckled softly, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "The ocean's full of secrets. It's up to us to respect them." Ellie leaned back, her gaze drifting to the stars. "Maybe that's why I feel drawn to it, like it's holding part of my story." Caleb didn't respond immediately. Instead, he set the net aside and looked at her. "Whatever your story is, Ellie, you'll figure it out. And until you do, you've got a place here." For the first time, Ellie smiled, a small tentative curve of her lips, but genuine. Caleb's words, simple as they were, felt like an anchor in the uncertainty surrounding her. The lantern flickered as the wind picked up, but neither of them moved. For that moment, the world was still, and the waves whispered promises of answers yet to come. Ellie stood at the edge of the dock, her gaze fixed on the gentle ripples of the water beneath her. The sound of Caleb's hammer striking wood echoed behind her as he repaired a splintered section of the pier. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsettled by fragments of memories that surfaced in her dreams the night before. Flashes of elegant rooms filled with dazzling lights, a man's shadowed face, and papers laid out on a sleek table. Each glimpse felt like holding onto shards of glass, sharp, fleeting, and incomplete. The sun glinted off the battered hull of her rescued lancha tied to the dock, and an impulse pulled her toward it. Her fingers grazed its surface, feeling the deep grooves of scratches left by the storm. As her hand trailed toward the stern, she froze. Something faint but familiar caught her eye, a logo etched near the edge of the boat's nameplate. Harris Enterprises. The letters sent a chill through her, as though they carried weight she didn't yet understand. Inside the cabin, Caleb flipped through a stack of mail he'd picked up from town. Most of it was useless, advertisements, overdue notices, but one envelope stood out bearing the emblem of a marine advocacy group. He opened it quickly, scanning its contents. "Declined funding," he muttered, tossing the paper onto the table with a sigh. Rusty, sprawled near his feet, perked up at the sound of his voice but quickly settled back down. Ellie stepped in, her expression guarded. Caleb glanced up, noticing the tension in her posture. "Something on your mind?" he asked, setting the letter aside. She hesitated, then gestured toward the lancha visible through the window. "The name Harris Enterprises. Does that mean anything to you?" Caleb stiffened. The name was a trigger, one that ignited a flame of resentment deep in his chest. "It should," he said, his voice colder than intended. "They own half the coast around here. They're also the reason this community is falling apart." Ellie's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Caleb stood, his frustration evident in the sharp movements of his hands as he crossed the room. Months ago, one of their facilities upstream leaked chemicals into the water, killed off the fish, wrecked the ecosystem. People here have been struggling to survive ever since, and Harris Enterprises, they denied responsibility and moved on like it never happened. Ellie blinked, absorbing his words. I didn't know." "How could you?" Caleb shot back, his tone laced with bitterness. "People like them live in a bubble. They don't see the damage they cause, or maybe they just don't care." The tension hung thick in the air as the day wore on. Caleb avoided Ellie, pouring himself into his work. She, in turn, wandered along the shoreline, her thoughts heavy with unease. By mid-afternoon, she returned to the lancha, determined to search it for anything that might jog her memory. She found a compartment under one of the seats, hidden beneath a loose panel. Inside was a slim, leather-bound journal, its pages mostly blank, save for a few handwritten notes at the beginning. One caught her eye, a hurried scrawl reading, "Marcus's proposal. Review carefully before signing." The name triggered something, a flash of the man's face, stern and calculating from her dreams. A memory surfaced, the sound of his voice low and insistent, pushing her to agree to something she wasn't certain of. Ellie's breathing quickened. Was Marcus someone she could trust, or was he tied to the feeling of danger that lingered in the back of her mind? When Ellie returned to the cabin, Caleb was sitting on the porch steps wiping his hands on a rag. His shoulders were tense, and his usual calm demeanor had been replaced by an air of simmering frustration. "I found this in the boat," Ellie said, holding out the journal. Caleb took it reluctantly, flipping through the pages. His expression darkened as he read the note. "Marcus, you know this guy?" "I think I do," Ellie admitted, her voice trembling. "But I don't know how or why, it's all still so foggy." Caleb closed the journal with a sharp snap and stood. "This is all connected, isn't it? You, the boat, the spill. It all ties back to Harris Enterprises." Ellie took a step back, his intensity catching her off guard. "I don't remember anything about the spill," she said defensively. "I don't even remember who I am." "But you're part of it," Caleb shot back, his voice rising. "Your name, your world, it's what's killing mine." The accusation hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Ellie's eyes welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I didn't choose this," she said softly. "I didn't choose any of it." Caleb's anger faltered as he saw the pain in her expression, but it didn't extinguish entirely. "I don't know who you are, Ellie, or Victoria, or whoever you turn out to be, but right now, all I see is someone tied to everything that's broken." He turned and walked toward the dock, leaving Ellie standing in the doorway, the weight of his words pressing down on her. As the sun set over the horizon, the waves lapped gently at the shore, indifferent to the storm brewing between the two strangers, brought together by fate. The cabin was quieter than usual, save for the occasional creak of the wooden beams as the wind shifted outside. Caleb stood by the window, staring at the fishing nets hanging to dry, his thoughts a whirlpool of anger and confusion. Ellie, no, Victoria, sat at the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly, fingers fidgeting in a rare display of nervousness. "Tell me the truth," Caleb said, his voice steady but laced with tension. He turned to face her, his expression hard but not unkind. "Are you Victoria Harris?" Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. I don't know. I don't remember," she stammered, though her trembling hands betrayed the weight of the question. Caleb took a step closer, holding up the journal he'd found in the boat. "This doesn't lie. Marcus's name, your company's name, they're all here. And that Lancia, it wasn't some rental. It's registered to you." Victoria blinked, her breath hitching as he spoke. She pressed her hands against her temples, her voice rising. "I don't remember any of it. I didn't even know my name until you told me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "How convenient," he muttered under his breath, though the bitterness in his tone made him wince internally. "I'm not lying," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be this person you think I am. I don't want to be tied to anything that hurt you or your community." The tension hung heavy between them, an invisible wall neither seemed willing to cross. Caleb exhaled deeply, dragging a chair across the room and sitting across from her. His gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. "I need to know what kind of person you are," he said quietly, "because right now I'm struggling to see past the name on that boat and everything it stands for." Victoria looked at him, her eyes glassy. "You think I'm some cold-hearted CEO who doesn't care about anyone but herself?" Caleb didn't respond immediately, his silence confirming her fear. She looked away, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But I don't even know who that person is anymore. Maybe I was her. Maybe I wasn't. I need time, Caleb. I need time to figure it out." As the conversation shifted, so did the tone. Caleb leaned back, crossing his arms. "All right," he said slowly. "But let me ask you this. What's the first thing you do remember?" Victoria closed her eyes, sifting through the fog in her mind. "The storm," she said finally. "The waves crashing. The cold. And before that..." She hesitated, then continued. "There were papers. Marcus was there. He wanted me to sign something. I remember feeling uneasy, like I couldn't trust him." Caleb frowned. "You think he's the one who put you on that boat?" Her brows furrowed as she struggled to make sense of the fractured images in her head. "I don't know, but it doesn't feel like an accident." Caleb studied her, the sharp edges of his anger dulling into something more complicated. Empathy, perhaps. He had seen people in pain before, but her confusion wasn't feigned. Whatever the truth was, she was as lost as he felt. You don't seem like the kind of person who'd turn a blind eye to something like the spill, he admitted grudgingly. But I can't ignore what your company's done. People around here are barely hanging on. Victoria met his gaze, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. If I did anything to contribute to that, I want to make it right. I don't know how yet, but I can't live with myself if I don't try. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Words don't mean much around here, Victoria. It's actions that count. I know, she said softly but with conviction. The conversation shifted again, this time to Caleb's life. Victoria asked about the fishing community, about the people he fought so hard to protect. He spoke of Sophie, who had practically raised her younger siblings after their parents left. He talked about the older fishermen who had seen better times and the kids who'd grown up learning the trade, only to watch it wither. His voice carried the weight of years of struggle, but there was also pride, a quiet resilience that had kept him going. I didn't grow up with much, Caleb admitted. But this place, these people, it's all I've ever known. And when the water started dying, it felt like we were dying too. Victoria listened intently, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her name, her company, might be the cause of his pain. As the fire in the hearth crackled softly, the two sat in a silence that felt less tense, more contemplative. Caleb broke it first. You want time to figure things out? He asked. Fine, but know this. I'm not just protecting you. I'm protecting this community. If you're tied to any of this mess, I'll need answers. Real ones. Victoria nodded, her expression somber but determined. You'll get them, I promise. For the first time since their confrontation began, Caleb's shoulders relaxed. He stood and moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll see where this leads. Victoria watched him go, her chest tight with a mix of gratitude and guilt. She wasn't sure if she deserved his help, but she knew she wouldn't waste it. As the night deepened, she sat by the window, gazing out at the dark expanse of the ocean. Somewhere out there her past awaited, shrouded in shadows, but not unreachable. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the cabin, casting long shadows on the walls. Victoria sat at the small table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Her eyes were distant, as if searching through the fog of her mind for answers. Caleb worked quietly outside, the rhythmic sound of his hammer echoing through the air as he repaired a damaged section of the dock. She had woken before dawn, startled by a vivid dream. Or was it a memory? The details lingered in her thoughts like whispers she couldn't quite catch. A boardroom filled with sharp-suited men, papers spread across a polished table, and Marcus Everett's voice cutting through the tension. This deal is critical, Victoria. If we delay, the entire operation collapses. In the dream, she had felt cornered, pressured by his urgency. But there was something else, a gnawing sense of distrust. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she set the mug down. She had to tell Caleb. Later, when Caleb came inside to grab a drink, he noticed her troubled expression. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, handing her a fresh glass of water. She hesitated, then looked up at him. I remembered something, not everything, but enough to make me think someone wanted me gone. Caleb leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. Go on. It was a meeting, she began. Marcus was there. He kept pushing me to approve something, an expansion, I think. He said it was urgent, that delays would cost us millions. But I didn't trust him. I remember feeling like he was hiding something from me. Caleb frowned, his eyes narrowing. And you think he had something to do with what happened to you? I don't know, Victoria admitted, her voice shaking. But if he did, he's dangerous. And if he finds out I'm still alive... She trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging in the air. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then we need to make sure he doesn't. That afternoon, Sophie arrived unannounced, her expression stern as usual. She placed a basket of fresh bread on the counter, her sharp eyes immediately darting to Victoria, who was perched near the window. How's our guest? Sophie asked, her tone pointed. Her name's Victoria, Caleb said, his tone carrying a note of finality. Sophie raised an eyebrow. Victoria, huh? So the memory's coming back? Victoria nodded cautiously, feeling the weight of Sophie's scrutiny. Sophie's gaze shifted to Caleb. "Can we talk outside?" Reluctantly, Caleb followed her to the porch. Sophie crossed her arms, her voice low but firm. "Caleb, are you sure about this? If she's who she says she is, she's trouble. And if she's lying, she's even more trouble." "She's not lying," Caleb replied, though the confidence in his voice was tinged with frustration. Sophie shook her head. "I'm not saying she's bad, but think about it. People like her don't end up here by accident. Whatever she's mixed up in, it's not something we can handle." Caleb exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I get it, Sophie, but I can't just throw her to the wolves." Sophie softened, her voice quieter. "Just be careful. You can't save everyone, Caleb. And sometimes helping someone like her could mean hurting yourself and the people who depend on you." Inside, Victoria sat alone, her thoughts racing. She could feel the weight of Sophie's distrust, and it only deepened her guilt. As she stared out at the calm waters, something caught her eye. A figure standing on the far edge of the dock. Her heart leapt into her throat as she moved closer to the window. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing and unmoving. She blinked, but when she looked again, the dock was empty. The fear from earlier surged back, and she stepped away from the window just as Caleb walked in. "Victoria?" he asked, noticing her pale complexion. "There was someone out there," she said quickly. "On the dock. I swear I saw someone." Caleb immediately grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, scanning the area. He checked the dock, the shoreline, and even the nearby tree line, but there was no sign of anyone. When he returned, his expression was serious. "There's no one out there." Victoria shook her head, her voice trembling. "I know what I saw, Caleb. What if they're looking for me?" Caleb placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll be ready. But for now, you need to stay calm. Panic won't help either of us." That night, Caleb sat at the table, sharpening a small fishing knife. Victoria watched him from across the room, her thoughts a chaotic mix of fear, guilt, and a growing sense of gratitude. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Caleb looked up, confused. "For what?" "For dragging you into this," she said. "You've already got enough to deal with. You don't need my mess on top of it." Caleb set the knife down and leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You didn't drag me into anything. I made a choice to help you, and I'll see it through, but you need to trust me, Victoria. If you're being hunted, we'll deal with it together." Her chest tightened at his words, a warmth spreading through the cracks of her fear. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of waves crashing against the shore. Somewhere in the shadows, the danger Victoria feared still lurked. But for now, she wasn't facing it alone. The rain began to fall lightly, a steady patter against the tin roof of Caleb's cabin. Inside, the warmth of the crackling fire seemed to shield them from the growing chill outside. Victoria sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by scattered papers Caleb had reluctantly pulled from his collection of community records. Maps of the bay, old petitions to corporate offices, and articles about the chemical spill lay between them. Caleb leaned against the edge of the table, his arms crossed, watching her closely as she studied the pages. Her brow furrowed in concentration, lips moving slightly as she read. He had always prided himself on being careful, guarded, but something about Victoria made his walls feel fragile. Maybe it was the way she seemed so determined to understand the damage her world had caused, or the quiet vulnerability in her eyes when she asked questions she didn't want the answers to. "You've been fighting this for years," Victoria said finally, her voice soft but weighted. She glanced up at him. "The petitions, the protests. It must feel like shouting into a void." Caleb shrugged, his eyes lingering on the papers. "It's not about being heard. It's about not giving up even when no one listens." Victoria's gaze fell back to the map in her hands, tracing a line along the coast where Caleb had marked affected zones. She could see it, the quiet determination that had carried him through years of hardship. It was the same drive that had led him to pull her from the storm-tossed waters. She realized then how much he had sacrificed, not just for himself but for the people around him. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. "For everything my company did to this place. For what you lost." Caleb's jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his eyes. Instead, there was something gentler, something resigned. "You didn't spill the chemicals, Victoria, and you didn't ask to be dragged into this mess." "I'm still part of it," she insisted. "And if I was the kind of person who let this happen, I don't know how I'll ever make up for it." "You don't have to," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "Not to me. But if you want to fix things, you start now. You don't wait for the past to come clean." The silence between them stretched, broken only by the rain and the occasional pop of the fire. Victoria leaned back, crossing her arms over her knees. "How do you do it?" she asked softly. "Keep fighting even when it feels hopeless?" Caleb hesitated before answering. "You fight because you have to, because if you don't, no one else will. And because sometimes you get moments that remind you why it's worth it." She looked at him, and he met her gaze. For a heartbeat, the room felt impossibly still. Victoria smiled faintly, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a quiet, undeniable pull. Later that evening, they stood side by side on the porch, the rain reduced to a soft drizzle. Caleb handed Victoria a mug of tea, his fingers brushing against hers briefly. She glanced at him, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. "This place," she murmured, staring out at the bay. "It's beautiful. Even now, after everything." Caleb nodded, his voice low. "It has its moments." Victoria turned to him, her expression contemplative. "You're not what I expected," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I don't know. But not this. Not someone who cares so much, who does so much for people who don't always appreciate it." Caleb's lips quirked into a faint smile. "It's not about what people give back. Sometimes it's just about doing the right thing." As the conversation ebbed, Victoria stepped closer, the space between them narrowing. The air seemed charged, the quiet between them no longer empty but full of unspoken understanding. Caleb's gaze flicked to her lips, and she noticed, her heart skipping a beat. Before either of them could second-guess the moment, Victoria leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, but it deepened naturally, an unspoken agreement in the soft press of lips. It wasn't about passion, it was about connection, about finding something steady in the chaos around them. The sound of footsteps shattered the moment. Caleb pulled back abruptly, his head snapping toward the direction of the noise. Victoria followed his gaze, her stomach twisting, as shadows moved outside the cabin. "Stay here," Caleb whispered, his voice low but urgent. He grabbed the knife he had sharpened the night before and crept toward the door. Victoria's pulse quickened as she watched him disappear into the rain. Moments later, the door burst open. Two men stepped inside, their clothes dark and damp, their eyes scanning the room with predatory intent. One of them smirked when he saw Victoria. "Well, well," the man said. "Looks like we found what we were looking for." Victoria backed away, her mind racing. Before she could react, Caleb reappeared behind them, his knife glinting in the dim light. "Get out," he growled, his voice steady but menacing. The men hesitated, clearly weighing their odds. One of them sneered. "You're making a mistake, Fisherman." "Maybe," Caleb said, his grip tightening on the blade, "but it'll be your last." The intruders exchanged a glance, then slowly retreated, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Caleb locked the door behind them, his shoulders tense. "We're not safe here," he said, turning to Victoria. "We need to leave, now." Victoria nodded, her heart pounding. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The hum of the truck's engine filled the silence as Caleb drove down the rain-slicked highway. Victoria sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but her thoughts far away. In the back seat, a bag stuffed with hastily packed belongings and papers lay half open. The events of the previous night clung to them like a heavy fog, each moment replaying in their minds. "We're almost there," Caleb said, breaking the quiet. His voice was steady, though a tension lingered beneath it. Victoria nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of her jacket. "And you're sure about this?" He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "I know someone in town who might be able to help. He's kept quiet about worse things." Her gaze softened as she watched him, grateful for his calm amidst the chaos. But beneath her gratitude was a growing unease. Marcus was out there, and now he knew she was alive. The small motel on the outskirts of the city was nothing special, but it offered anonymity. Caleb parked behind the building, keeping the truck out of sight. Inside, the room was sparse but clean, with beige walls and a flickering overhead light. Victoria unpacked the documents they had brought, spreading them across the small table by the window. Caleb leaned against the door, arms crossed, his watchful eyes scanning the lot outside. "Let's see what we're working with," she murmured, flipping through the files. Among the pages were contracts, emails, and financial reports from Harris Enterprises. Victoria's heart sank as she pieced together the story they told, a cover-up of the chemical spill, signed off by Marcus Everett himself. There were memos warning of environmental risks and others dismissing the concerns as manageable losses. Her voice broke as she held up one of the documents. This was deliberate. He knew what would happen, and he went ahead with it anyway. Caleb stepped closer, his brow furrowed as he scanned the pages. "And your name's on half of these." Her hands trembled as she placed the paper down. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't. He must have forged my approval." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any words. The hours passed in tense focus, the two of them combing through the evidence. Victoria found emails between Marcus and an unnamed third party discussing payouts to silence whistleblowers. A cold dread settled over her as the pieces came together. "They're protecting each other," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if I come forward with this, they'll destroy me." Caleb met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Then we hit them where it hurts. Take this to someone who can't be bought." Victoria hesitated. "That's easier said than done. Marcus has connections everywhere." "Then we find the ones he doesn't," Caleb replied firmly. That night, as Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the scattered papers, Caleb returned from a trip to the nearby diner. He placed a bag of food on the table and handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "You need to eat," he said simply. She took the cup with a small smile. "Thanks." As they ate in silence, Caleb spoke up. "You said Marcus knows you're alive. How?" Victoria looked down at her plate, the memory of the strangers at the cabin flashing through her mind. "I don't know. Maybe the men he sent saw something, or maybe he was already watching." Caleb's grip tightened on his fork. "If he's watching, we need to move carefully. No more staying in one place too long." She nodded, but the weight of his words only deepened her worry. The next morning, Caleb left to meet his contact while Victoria stayed behind to organize the evidence. As she sorted through the files, her phone buzzed, an anonymous message. "You can't run forever, Victoria, neither can he." Her blood ran cold. She dropped the phone as if it burned, her chest tightening with fear. The message was a clear warning. Marcus was already closing in. When Caleb returned, her pale face told him everything. She handed him the phone silently, and his expression darkened as he read the message. "This is his game," Caleb said, his voice low and edged with anger. "He wants you scared, wants you to stop digging." "Well, it's working," Victoria admitted, her voice trembling. "What if he hurts you? Or someone in your community? I couldn't live with that." Caleb stepped closer, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "He doesn't scare me, Victoria, and he won't win. Not if we stick together." That night, as the city's lights flickered through the window, Caleb sat beside Victoria, poring over the files one last time. Despite the danger, a quiet determination filled the room. "We're going to bring him down," Caleb said, his voice steady and certain. Victoria looked at him, her fear momentarily replaced by a flicker of hope. "Together?" He nodded. "Together." But outside, in the shadow of the motel, a dark figure lingered, watching the window where their light burned. The storm was far from over, and Marcus wasn't finished yet. The lights in the conference hall were blinding, the room abuzz with the hum of cameras and murmurs. Victoria adjusted the microphone on the podium, her heart pounding as she scanned the sea of expectant faces. Reporters jostled for position, their lenses trained on her, ready to capture every word, every slip. Beside her, Caleb stood slightly back, his presence a steadying force. He had insisted on coming despite her protests. "If you're doing this, you're not doing it alone," he had said. Now, with the weight of the truth pressing down on her, Victoria drew a deep breath. "I'm here to speak about the events surrounding Harris Enterprises and the chemical spill that devastated our coastal waters," she began, her voice steady but resolute. The room fell silent. As Victoria spoke, she outlined the chain of events she and Caleb had uncovered. Emails, forged signatures, and memos that exposed Marcus Everett's greed and deliberate disregard for environmental regulations. Each revelation was met with gasps and furious scribbling from the press, but the moment of reckoning came when she admitted her own culpability. "There are documents with my name on them," she said, her voice faltering for just a moment. "And while I now know they were signed without my knowledge, I cannot deny that my inattention allowed this to happen. For that, I take full responsibility." Caleb's jaw tightened as he watched her. She was laying herself bare, her career, her reputation, everything on the line. Victoria finished her speech with a declaration of intent. "I am stepping down as CEO of Harris Enterprises, effective immediately. This company needs leadership that prioritizes ethics over profit, and I will dedicate myself to repairing the harm we caused, no matter how long it takes." The room erupted in questions as soon as she stepped away from the podium, but Victoria ignored them, walking off stage with Caleb close behind. Back in the quiet of the car, the tension was palpable. Caleb gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, while Victoria stared out the window, the city lights blurring past. "You didn't have to do that," Caleb said finally, his voice tight. Victoria turned to him, her expression weary. "Of course I did. It was the right thing to do." "And now what?" he asked, glancing at her. "You're out of the company, you have no resources, no support. What happens when Marcus makes his next move?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "I couldn't stay silent, Caleb. You of all people should understand that." "I do," he said, his voice rising. "But this isn't just about you anymore. You've put a target on your back, and now you're vulnerable. Did you even think about what that means for us?" Victoria froze, the weight of his words settling heavily. "For us?" she repeated. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Victoria, I care about you. But I don't know how we're supposed to move forward when our worlds keep pulling us in opposite directions." Her heart sank. "So what? You think this was a mistake?" He didn't answer immediately, and the silence cut deeper than any words could. When they returned to the motel, the air between them was cold, heavy with unspoken doubts. Caleb stepped outside to clear his head, leaving Victoria alone with the fragments of her life. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bag of evidence they had handed over to the authorities earlier that day. She had done the right thing. She knew that. But Caleb's words lingered, feeding her insecurities. Had she sacrificed too much? Was her fight for redemption destined to cost her everything? Outside, Caleb leaned against the truck, his eyes fixed on the darkened street. He hated the way their conversation had ended, but the fear gnawed at him. Victoria had faced her demons head-on, but in doing so she had exposed herself to even greater danger. And him? He was just a fisherman, caught in a battle far beyond his world. What could he possibly offer her, beyond fleeting moments of comfort? Rusty, who had been resting in the truck, padded over and nudged Caleb's hand. Caleb scratched behind the dog's ears, finding a small measure of solace in the simple gesture. Later that night, Victoria found Caleb sitting on the steps outside their room. She hesitated before joining him, the silence between them thick, but not as sharp as before. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. Caleb looked at her, his expression softening. "You don't need to apologize, I'm just worried." "I know," she said, her voice trembling, "but I can't undo what's already done. All I can do is keep moving forward." He nodded slowly. "And I'll be here, for as long as I can be. But you need to understand, Victoria, this doesn't just affect you. It affects the people around you. Me, my community, we've already lost so much." Her eyes glistened, but she held back her tears. "I'll find a way to make it right. For you, for them." Caleb didn't respond, but his hand brushed against hers, a small gesture that spoke of lingering hope. As the night stretched on, the two sat in silence, their connection tested but not broken. The road ahead was uncertain, but for now they faced it together, however tenuous the bond might be. The rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt filled the truck as Caleb and Victoria sped through the quiet coastal highway. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Victoria's phone rested on the dashboard, its screen glowing with the email she had just received, a tip-off from a former Harris Enterprises employee. Marcus was planning to leave the country, but not before meeting one last time with his associates at a private dock just outside the city. "We can't let him get away," Victoria said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Caleb glanced at her, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. "If we're doing this, we do it right. No rash moves." Victoria nodded, though her heart raced. They weren't just chasing Marcus, they were chasing justice for everything he had taken from them. The dock came into view as they pulled off the main road and into a secluded parking area. The moon hung low, casting a silvery glow over the water. A sleek yacht bobbed gently at the end of the pier, its lights dimmed. Caleb killed the engine and motioned for Victoria to stay low. Together they crept closer, staying hidden behind stacks of shipping crates. Voices carried through the night. Marcus, unmistakable in his sharp, clipped tone, and two others, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Victoria strained to hear, her breath catching as Marcus's words became clear. "Once we're out of the country, the fallout won't matter. The company's assets are protected, and they'll pin this on her if it comes to that." Her stomach twisted. He was still trying to shift the blame even now. Caleb signaled her to retreat, and they quickly returned to the truck. Victoria fumbled with her phone, dialing the number of the investigator they had been working with. "This is Harris," she whispered when the call connected. "We've found him. Private dock about 30 miles south of the city. He's trying to flee." "Stay where you are," the investigator instructed. "We're on our way. Don't approach him." The line went dead, leaving them in silence. Caleb looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We should leave," he said quietly. "If he knows you're here, this could get dangerous." Victoria shook her head. "I'm not running anymore." The wait felt endless, each second stretching like an eternity. Finally, the distant wail of sirens cut through the stillness, growing louder with each passing moment. Caleb and Victoria watched as police vehicles sped toward the dock, their lights flashing. Panic erupted among Marcus and his associates. The men scrambled toward the yacht, but officers were already closing in, shouting commands that echoed across the water. Marcus broke into a sprint, his polished shoes slipping on the damp wooden pier. He barely made it aboard the yacht before it began to pull away, its engines roaring to life. "They can't let him escape," Victoria said, her voice rising with desperation. But the police were prepared. A patrol boat intercepted the yacht before it could gain speed, forcing it to halt. Officers swarmed aboard, and within moments, Marcus was dragged off in handcuffs, his protests drowned out by the chaos. Victoria let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging with relief. Caleb placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's over," he said softly. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Corporate scandal exposed. Marcus Everett arrested in environmental crime cover-up. Victoria's name was mentioned, but this time it was in a different light. A whistleblower who had turned against her own company to bring the truth to light. As they sat in a quiet diner, sipping coffee, Caleb handed her a folded newspaper. "Looks like you're the hero this time." Victoria smiled faintly, though the weight of the last few days was evident in her eyes. "I didn't do it alone," she said, glancing at him. He shrugged. "Maybe, but you could have walked away. You didn't." In the days that followed, Victoria took swift action to begin repairing the damage her company had caused. With the board dissolved and new leadership in place, she announced a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to restoring the affected coastal areas. Standing at the shoreline one afternoon, Caleb watched as workers unloaded supplies and machinery for the restoration efforts. The bay, once lifeless and grey, was beginning to show signs of recovery. Victoria approached him, her boots sinking slightly into the sand. "It's a start," she said, nodding toward the activity. Caleb turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did," she replied firmly. "This place deserves better. You deserve better." For a moment neither of them spoke. The sound of the waves filled the silence, a reminder of the connection they had forged amidst the chaos. Caleb finally broke the quiet, his voice low but earnest. "You've changed, Victoria, and not just for the sake of this place." She met his gaze, her heart skipping a beat at the warmth she found there. "You've changed me, Caleb. You made me see what really matters." He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "You're not the same woman I pulled out of the water." "And you're not just a fisherman," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Caleb and Victoria stood side by side, watching the first signs of hope ripple across the bay. In that quiet moment, the weight of the past no longer felt so heavy. Together, they had weathered the storm, and now a new chapter awaited them, one built on trust, resilience, and the promise of a better future. The waves lapped gently against the shore, their rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the soft chatter of the workers gathered along the beach. The air carried the scent of salt and renewal, mingling with the faint hum of machinery as the restoration efforts pressed forward. Caleb stood near the waterline, his hands tucked into his pockets, watching the early morning light glint off the surface of the bay. The change was subtle, but undeniable. Fish had begun to return, their silvery shapes darting just below the surface. The seabirds, absent for so long, circled overhead, their calls a hopeful melody. For the first time in months, Caleb felt something he hadn't allowed himself to believe in: hope. Behind him, Victoria approached, her footsteps light against the sand. She wore a simple jacket over her jeans, her usual polished demeanor softened by the early hour. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze following his out to the horizon. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Caleb turned to her, his expression unreadable. "It's getting there. Still a long way to go." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Victoria spoke again. "The board signed off on the additional funding yesterday. We'll have resources to keep this going for as long as it takes." Caleb nodded but didn't immediately respond. His silence wasn't cold, it was reflective. After everything they had been through, words often felt too small to hold the weight of their journey. "You've done a lot, Victoria," he said finally, his voice low. "More than I ever thought someone like you would." She glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Someone like me." "A CEO," he clarified, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "From a world where people like me don't usually matter." Her smile faded into something more serious. "You always mattered, Caleb. I just didn't know how much until I met you." As the sun climbed higher, they walked along the beach, the sand cool beneath their feet. The morning was still young, and the workers had yet to fully arrive, leaving the two of them in a rare moment of quiet. Victoria paused, crouching to pick up a small, smooth shell that glistened in the light. She turned it over in her hands, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found me?" "All the time," Caleb admitted, his voice tinged with sincerity. "I don't know what brought you to that boat, or why I was the one to find you, but I'm glad I did." Victoria straightened, meeting his gaze. "So am I." There was a weight in her words, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had endured, the dangers, the sacrifices, and the bond they had formed through it all. They stopped near a rocky outcrop, the waves crashing gently against the stones. Caleb leaned against one of the larger rocks, his arms crossed as he studied her. "You've changed, you know," he said. Victoria tilted her head, curious. "Have I?" He nodded. "The woman I pulled out of that boat, she didn't know who she was. And maybe that was a good thing, because the woman standing here now, she's someone who fights for what's right, someone who cares." Victoria felt her throat tighten, but she managed a small laugh. "You're making me sound braver than I feel." "Bravery isn't about not being scared," Caleb said simply. It's about doing what's right, even when you are. As the first workers began to arrive, Caleb and Victoria made their way back toward the main stretch of the beach. They passed Sophie, who gave them a knowing smile and a wave. The sight of her reminded Victoria of how far she had come, not just in her personal journey, but in earning the trust of people like Sophie, who had every reason to doubt her. "Think she likes you now?" Caleb teased, his voice light. Victoria smirked. "I think she tolerates me. It's progress." Caleb chuckled, a rare sound that warmed the space between them. When the day's work was done, Caleb and Victoria returned to the quiet of his cabin. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the room in a warm golden glow. They sat on the porch steps, watching the waves as the evening tide rolled in. Rusty lay at Caleb's feet, his tail thumping lazily against the wooden boards. Victoria leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder, her voice soft. "Do you think we'll ever really be done with all of this? The guilt, the work?" He rested his hand over hers, his grip steady and reassuring. "I don't know if it ever goes away completely, but that doesn't mean we stop trying." As dawn broke the next morning, Caleb and Victoria found themselves back on the beach, their footprints the first marks in the untouched sand. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Victoria turned to Caleb, her face serene. "It feels like a new beginning," she said. He nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "It does." For the first time, the future felt less like a storm and more like the calm that followed it. Together, they stood at the edge of the water, ready to face whatever came next, not as individuals, but as partners bound by the tides of love and redemption. Life has a way of bringing together the most unlikely paths, weaving a story out of chaos and stillness, loss and redemption. Victoria and Caleb were two souls from worlds that should never have collided, one bound by privilege, the other by hardship. Yet, through the storms they faced together, they discovered that true transformation comes not from erasing the past, but from confronting it, learning from it, and choosing a better way forward. Their journey reminds us that love is not about perfection, but about growth. It's about seeing someone's scars, understanding their battles, and standing beside them as they become the best version of themselves. Caleb and Victoria's love wasn't simple, nor was it easy, but it was real. And in their shared story, we see that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are in letting go of who we thought we were to embrace who we can become. The tides will always rise and fall, just as life ebbs and flows. But it's in those in-between moments, the calm after the storm, the dawn after the darkest night, that we find our truest selves. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on the power of love, resilience, and redemption, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments how this journey resonated with you. And remember, the most beautiful transformation